Hey, it's Dr. Dunaway here with Chiro Strength, and in today's video we're diving deep into the tactical frog, which is one of two of my favorite mobility drills. And the reason I love it so much is that it's a good teacher of coordinating lumbar spine and pelvic congruity, meaning to get good pelvic motion and keeping the lumbar spine stable. It's really a good tool for learning how to do that, so you can apply that to a squat to prevent maybe a butt wink. And it's just a really good way to loosen up the hips, whether you're doing running or squatting or Olympic lifting. And so it has a bunch of different applications. So let me kind of take you through how I coach this and the different techniques I use it for. The first thing I'll do is I'll get people into a tactical frog, and I'll say, assume that as far as how wide the knees get, assume a good squat position. So in this particular case, my toes will be in line with my knees, and they'll be into the ground as if I'm standing, right? And now what I'll do is I'll have them rock back and look for this pelvis to kind of tuck under like this. And what I will cue them to do is I'll say, okay, you feel yourself tucking right here. I'll get them in that position. I'll make them anteriorly tilt their pelvis so they can kind of feel the difference between the tucked butt and this anterior pelvis to keep a good neutral lumbar spine. And then we'll just grease the groove of that motion of teaching the brain what it feels like to be in deep hip flexion, but keep a good neutral lumbar spine. And then in this position, I'll have them brace as if we're getting ready to get punched in the belly is what I'll tell them. So we'll brace, bring the ribs down, and I'll just breathe in this position in a deep hip flexion so the brain starts to, again, learn what it feels like to be in deep hip flexion with a good neutral lumbar spine. So that's a really good coordination drill to after you loosen up the hips, to learn how deep you can get and where your breaking point is, or where you start to get lumbar flexion. So the other thing I'll do is I have two positions. So now my ankles are gonna kind of, for me, it's more comfortable for my ankles to be kind of turned out to the side. If you're more comfortable with your shoelaces on the ground, that's fine, but we won't have the toes into the ground in this one. Two positions, one here, one here. And now what that does from a side view is it'll change the degree of hip flexion I have, right? So that's kind of it's more of a kind of progression to come down to the elbows like this. But in general, here's my cadence. Rock back, and all we're doing, we're breathing, trying to keep that anterior pelvic tilt we talked about, and I'll rock for probably a minute in this position right here. And the next thing I'll do is I'll kick one leg out. And with one leg out now, you can see my toes on the ground pointed forward. I'll rock back, again, trying to keep that anterior tilt, trying to keep myself from rocking that back, or tucking that butt under and flexing that back. And again, we'll just rock for 30 seconds as I keep a good, steady breathing pattern. Now, to get more of the hamstrings, I'll come here and allow my toe to come up off the ground here. And now as I rock, this toe will come off the ground like this. And again, this variation can be on the hands or on the knees. It'll change the stretch, so it's really just kind of figure out where you get the best stretch, and again, trying to prevent yourself from flexing the lumbar spine. And we'll come to the other side like this, both with the foot on the ground and the foot coming up, going through all of those positions to make sure you're getting the stretch where you need it. Now the last thing I'll do is I'll come down on my elbows and my knees. The progression as well is just, you start where you just start to really feel a good stretch in the hips, and as you progress, you'll be able to get those knees a little wider. Try to keep the feet in line with the knees. So you see back here, my toe, you can kind of see it peeking out. It's not back here like this. I want to make sure that you're not getting this external rotation with this, although it does change up the stretch a little bit. But for hip mobility purposes, I want to keep those ankles in line with the knees. I'm going to come back. And now to get some internal rotation, I'm going to try to bring the side of my foot towards the ceiling as I bring up. And as you can see, my hip, I come down to touch the hip to the ground and then back up. And then I rock back, try to prevent myself from coming forward as much as possible. I'm going to come forward and off to the side a little bit. But now I'm going to get some internal rotation with this tactical frog. So I start with coordination, making sure you can feel what it feels like to get back deep in that. And then I go through those different kind of mobility sequences with either the foot on the ground or the toe pointed to the ceiling, and kind of slowly start to widen the stance with the legs on the ground. And that's pretty much what I do. And I'll alter it up. I'll focus one day on a little different stretch depending on my adductors are more tight or my hamstrings are more tight. Now, what this doesn't do is hip extension. So I usually supplement this with a good hip extension drill and kind of about for a minute or so go into the tactical frog and do a couple different variations, come up into some hip extension for 15 to 20 seconds, and then back down to that tactical frog. And whether you're, like I said, squatting, running, whatever, it's a great hip mobility prep and a hip mobility drill on your recovery days as well. So that is how I kind of coach and when and how I use the tactical frog. It is a part of almost every type of low back rehab protocol I have. And it's really just a great overall drill. So if you got any questions, leave a comment below. You can always reach me at drdunaway@chirostrength.com. I'll love to hear from you, answer your questions, or make a video on a subject that you have questions about. And like I always say, don't just mend, transcend. Thanks, guys.